The Civil Rights Movement was a very trying time in our nation. The movement itself existed between 1955 through 1968. It is taught to have begun with the Montgomery bus boycott and have ended with the assassination of Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. After President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, slavery was ended. The African American community began its fight for equality. This came to a head in the form of the Civil Rights Movement. During the 1900s, African Americans were seen as second-class citizens. Segregation was considered the ideal condition. This meant that African American and European American individuals were kept separate in all aspects of life, whether it be school, drinking fountains, different area of the buses, and separate areas of the city. The Montgomery bus boycott was the first push to end segregation by the African American community. On December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks got on the bus simply heading home from work. She took the only seat available, which happened to be at the front of the bus. When a white gentleman got on, she was told to give him her seat, and she refused. She was arrested and charged with disorderly conduct and breaking the segregation laws. The Montgomery Improvement Association organized a boycott of the city buses to bring the city leaders' attention to the inequality that was occurring. They elected Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. as their leader to ensure that people could boycott the city buses and still do what they needed to do. A carpool was set up to provide transportation. On February 21, 1956, a Montgomery County grand jury indicted 90 bus boycott leaders and charged them with rioting without cause. On April 24, 1956, bus companies in more than a dozen southern cities stopped the practice of segregation, but Montgomery declared that bus segregation would continue. Federal judges ruled that city and state bus segregation laws were unconstitutional on June 5, 1956. And that year in November, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the Alabama bus segregation law. The fight was still not over, though, for American equality. It spread all over the South. In North Carolina, on February 1, 1960, 4 college students from North Carolina A&T went to get served at an all-white restaurant. The sitting that they required spread all throughout. The African American people seemed to understand that they needed to take action themselves instead of leading others to fight for equality. In 1961, freedom rides began to carry people all over. In 1962, there were riots at the University of Mississippi because James Meredith, the school's first black student, began attending. Also, that year, the armed forces opened up every branch of service but the National Guard to African Americans. 1963 is a well-known year for the Civil Rights Movement. This was the year that big steps were taken, like the March on Washington and Martin Luther's I Have a Dream.
This nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall...
The march on Washington was inspirational to African American people, but it also had some side effects. There began to be more aggressive attacks to deter the movement, like the church bombing in Birmingham. In 1964, there began to be a little more hope for the movement. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, and it was signed by President Lyndon Johnson. This meant that the government now supported the equality of the nation's African American citizens. But the citizens did not want to comply, and the violence continued through the following years. In 1965, Malcolm X, who was a leader within the Civil Rights Movement, who, unlike Dr. King, focused more on changing what individuals could by violence, was assassinated. In 1966, African Americans began to have more governmental power, which was a sign that equality was occurring. Edward Brooke, a Republican from Massachusetts, was elected the first U.S. Senator. Things continued to change through 1967, as Thurgood Marshall became the first black to be named a Supreme Court justice, and Carl Stokes became mayor of Cleveland, and Richard Hatcher became mayor of Gary, Indiana. They were the first black men to be elected mayors of major U.S. cities. 1968 brought about what people believed to be the end of the Civil Rights Movement. In early evening of April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed by a single shot which struck his face and neck. He was staying at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. He was pronounced dead at 1705 at St. John Hospital. James Earl Gray was convicted to 99 years in prison for his murder. Martin Luther King's assassination is viewed by many as the end of the Civil Rights Movement. He was the driving force behind a lot of actions that had taken place, and he was a leader from the very beginning. Today it's clear the effects of the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Act put an end to the mainstream discrimination that was occurring within American society. Now the majority of Americans can go to integrated schools. We go to the same restaurants as people with other ethnicities and think nothing of it. All of the freedom and experiences that we so easily take for granted are all because of what occurred during the Civil Rights Movement.